What if the person you love most became your greatest prison? Maria believed she had found the perfect love. Lucas was attentive, charismatic, the kind of man who made any woman feel unique. But what began as a fairy tale soon became a nightmare from which it seemed impossible to escape. Small gestures of control, looks that made her feel smaller, sweet words that hid thorns. Before she knew it, she was no longer in charge of her own life. For 15 years, Maria lived between moments of affection and fear, trying to believe that he would change, trying to convince herself that everything would be all right. But how long can love justify pain? Until when can you pretend that silence isn't a cry for help? This is the story of a woman who, for a long time, thought she had no way out, until one day the only possible choice was to run away. But freedom comes at a price, and escaping doesn't always mean being safe. Now Maria reveals everything. The hot, dry air enveloped Maria as soon as she got off the bus, holding her small suitcase tightly. Sophia walked beside her, excited at the idea of introducing her to the village where she grew up. "You'll love it here," she assured her with a broad smile. Maria took a deep breath, smelling the earth mixed with the scent of wildflowers. It was different from the big city, simpler, quieter, just what she needed. They walked along the main street, where colorful flags adorned the sky, and the sound of laughter mixed with the joyful rhythm of the music in the distance. The square was full of people preparing for the evening's festivities. Stalls were selling typical sweets, children were running around among the adults, and lights were flashing on the old street lamps, creating a welcoming atmosphere. "Let's get an ice cream," suggested Sophia, pulling Maria by the arm. They approached one of the stalls when a tall, brown-haired man with an easy smile stopped beside them. "If you don't mind, let me offer," he said, handing Maria a coconut ice cream. She hesitated, surprised by the unexpected gesture. "Ah, thank you, but—" "You don't have to refuse," he interrupted, winking with amusement. "It would be an offense to deny something so good." Sophia crossed her arms, analyzing the scene with an arched eyebrow. "Always like this, Lucas? Doing the gallant thing?" He laughed without seeming affected. "Only when the occasion calls for it." He turned to Maria. "You're not from around here." Maria shook her head. "I'm visiting. Sophia convinced me to come and see the place." "Well then, I hope you enjoy it." Lucas pointed to the ice cream still in her hand. "But I warn you, if you don't like it, you can give it back to me." She smiled, feeling an unexpected warmth on her face. "I think I'll risk it." Doom. The minutes passed quickly. Maria found herself laughing at the stories Lucas told about the village. He had a captivating way of speaking, gesticulating, and modulating his voice as if each story were a great spectacle. "So, Maria, what do you think of our little paradise?" "Charming," she admitted. "It's as if time passes differently here." Lucas tilted his head, appraising her. "Maybe it's the kind of place that hooks people." The sentence hung in the air for a moment. His gaze was intense, full of something Maria couldn't define, but then he smiled again, dispelling any tension. "If you need a tour guide, you know where to find me." As he walked away, Sophia shook her head. "Careful, huh? Lucas has a way with words." Maria bit her lip, watching him disappear among the people. Maybe it was just a chance encounter, or maybe it was the beginning of something that would change her life forever. The afternoon heat gave way to a gentle breeze when Maria met Lucas again the next day. He was waiting for her near the square, leaning against a wooden bench with a carefree smile. "I didn't think you'd come," he said as soon as he saw her. "Why?" asked Maria, crossing her arms. "Maybe you thought I was a dangerous guy," he replied, winking. Maria laughed. "Well, I don't know yet." The two of them started walking through the village, talking about everything and nothing at the same time. Lucas pointed out the old buildings, told funny stories about his neighbors, and talked about life there. Maria felt more and more at ease. There was something about him that made her forget about time. The next few days passed in the same way. Walks, conversations, laughter. Lucas always came up with a new excuse to see her, and she didn't mind. One afternoon, they sat at a viewpoint where they could see the sunset tinting the sky, orange and pink. Lucas turned to her, his eyes shining. "Would you go back to the city?" Maria hesitated. "I don't know, my life is there. What if your life could be somewhere else?" She looked at him, her heart racing. The way Lucas looked at her made everything seem possible. That night, lying in bed, Maria heard Sophia sigh from across the room. "So, are you going to tell me what's going on?" Maria smiled in the dark. "Nothing's happening." Sophia snorted. "Yeah, right. Do you think I don't notice? You're falling in love." Maria turned around, staring at the ceiling. "Maybe." Sophia was silent for a moment before saying, "Just make sure you know what you're doing. This is all going too fast." The next morning, Maria and Lucas met again. He was more serious than usual. "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" Lucas took a deep breath. "What if you stayed?" She blinked, surprised. "Not just for a few days. Forever." Maria felt her heart race. "Are you serious?" "Yes." Lucas held her hand. "I don't want you to leave." She looked at their intertwined fingers. Something in her screamed that this was crazy, but another part of her wanted to believe that fate had brought her here for a reason. "Stay with me, Maria," he whispered. She closed her eyes for a second, then to her own surprise she nodded. Maria slung her bag over her shoulder and took a deep breath before walking through the door of Lucas's house. The smell of home-cooked food hung in the air, and female voices echoed down the hallway. Anna, Lucas's mother, appeared in the living room with a broad smile, her arms open, as if she already considered her part of the family. "Welcome, dear." Maria thanked her, feeling a knot in her stomach. Ever since she had agreed to stay, everything seemed to happen too quickly. Marina, Clara, and Emma, Lucas's sisters, sat at the table, watching her with appraising looks. "So you're the new owner of our brother's heart?" asked Marina, resting her chin on her hand. Lucas slung an arm around Maria's shoulders and smiled. "More than that, she's part of the family now." Anna clapped her hands, pleased. "That means she'll learn how we do things around here." Maria blinked, uncertain. "What do you mean?" Anna handed her a dishcloth. "Everyone helps here. Lunch has to be ready by noon, dinner by 7. And Lucas likes his food well seasoned." The sisters exchanged complicit glances. Maria held the cloth, feeling a strange oppression in her chest. "Of course," she said, unable to find any other answer. The first few days passed like a blur. There was always something to do, sweeping, cooking, washing. But the strangest thing was the way Lucas was treated. He never lifted a finger. His plate was always served first, and his mother made sure everything was just the way he liked it. One evening, Maria was helping to wash the dishes when Emma approached. "You're doing well," she said, drying a glass. "Thank you." Emma gave her a curious look. "You still don't get it, do you?" Maria frowned. "Understand what?" Emma smiled sideways. "Lucas has always been the prince of the house." Marina walked past them and laughed. "I hope you're ready to treat him the way he deserves." Maria's blood ran cold. Lucas entered the kitchen at that moment, slipping his arms around her waist. "Everything okay here?" Maria forced a smile. "Of course." He kissed her cheek and left, not noticing the tension in the air. That night, as she lay next to Lucas, Maria felt a restlessness growing inside her. Something about the way the house worked seemed wrong, but she pushed the thought away. She had chosen that path, and now she had to adapt. Lucas rolled over in bed and whispered in her ear, "I'm glad you stayed." Maria forced herself to smile, despite the uncomfortable feeling in her chest. Maria swirled the spoon in the pot, watching the broth bubble gently. The aromas of garlic and spices mingled in the air, but nothing could dispel the tension in her chest. Lucas entered the kitchen, came up behind her and looked over her shoulder. "What are you cooking?" "Beef stew," she replied, trying to sound cheerful. He frowned and picked up a spoon, tasting the broth. His face contorted into a grimace. "It's tasteless," Maria blinked in surprise, "but I followed your mother's recipe. My mother cooks better." He dropped the spoon in the sink and crossed his arms. "I think you still have a lot to learn." The words were spoken coolly, but the calm tone gave Maria a chill. His sisters, sitting at the table, watched the scene with amused expressions. Marina whispered something to Emma, who laughed discreetly. Maria felt a lump in her throat, but forced herself to smile. "I'll try to get better." That evening, while washing the dishes, she overheard Clara and Emma talking. "She still doesn't understand her place," Emma laughed, "but she will soon." Maria pressed her lips together, ignoring the conversation. She took a deep breath and tried to shake off the feeling that she was being molded to fit into a space that didn't belong to her. The next day she decided to go out and buy some fresh ingredients at the market. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. But before she could leave, Lucas appeared in the hallway. "Where are you going?" "Just to the market." He crossed his arms. "Alone?" Maria hesitated. "Yes. Why?" "I'd rather you didn't go out without me." She laughed nervously. "It's just a walk to the fair. I won't be long." Lucas approached, holding her wrist firmly. "I don't want you to go." Maria's smile disappeared. He stared at her intensely, his jaw clenched. "Why?" she whispered, trying to stay calm. "Because I don't like it." He let go of her wrist, but his gaze made it clear that it wasn't a request. Maria went back inside, her heart racing. Later, she tried to vent to Sophia over the phone. "I think he's being overprotective." "Or controlling," Sophia retorted. "Maria, do you realize what's going on?" Maria bit her lip. "He just wants to protect me." Sophia sighed. "If you keep justifying everything, soon you won't have any more freedom." Maria hung up without answering. She observed Lucas chatting animatedly with his mother in the living room. The charismatic man she had met was still there. But beneath the smile, there was something that made her feel smaller and smaller. Maria ran her fingers along the necklace that had just been placed around her neck. The small pendant shone in the dim light of the room. Lucas watched her reaction, a satisfied smile on his lips. "Do you like it?" "It's beautiful," he replied, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. "I want you to wear it all the time," he said, sliding his fingers along the chain, "so everyone knows you're mine." Maria forced a smile and nodded. The next few days were a delicate dance between moments of affection and tension. Lucas was able to present her with affectionate gestures in the morning and criticize her for the smallest things in the evening. One afternoon, while he was hanging out clothes, Marina approached him. "You get used to it," she said in an almost gentle tone. Maria frowned. "To what?" "His moods. Lucas has always been like that." Maria swallowed. "But he can change, can't he?" Marina let out a short laugh. "Men don't change. We're the ones who learn to mold ourselves." That night, Maria tried to forget Marina's words. She was determined to find a balance, to avoid the triggers that made Lucas angry. But all it took was one innocent conversation for everything to fall apart. "Why don't you work?" she asked during dinner. Lucas looked up, slowly putting down his cutlery. "What did you say?" Maria felt a chill run down her spine, but tried to keep it natural. "I just meant that I'm the man of this house." Her voice came out low, but loaded with something dangerous. Anna snorted, quickly changing the subject. Lucas's sisters avoided looking at Maria. After dinner, Lucas approached her in the bedroom, crossing his arms. "You embarrassed me in front of my family." "I just asked you a question," he whispered. He stared at her for long seconds. Then, without warning, he grabbed her wrist. Maria held back a groan of pain. "I do everything for you," he said, his voice cold. "And this is how you repay me?" She felt her heart race. "Let me go, Lucas." He let her go abruptly and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry." Maria massaged her sore wrist. Lucas ran his hands through his hair, looking frustrated. "You drive me crazy sometimes." He pulled her into a tight hug. "I love you. I just want things to be perfect." She remained motionless in his arms, her heart racing. The next morning, while washing her face, she noticed the slight red mark on her wrist. His grip had left traces. Maria closed her eyes. She had to believe that it wouldn't happen again. Maria looked out of the window, watching the dirt road that led to the house. The sky was overcast, reflecting the heaviness she felt in her chest. The night before had been a warning, and she knew she had to get out of there before it was too late. At dinner, she tried to act naturally. Lucas talked to his mother about trivial matters, as if nothing had happened, but Maria could see him watching her every move. After collecting the dishes, she retired to her room. She closed the door slowly and knelt beside the bed. Carefully, she lifted the mattress and pulled out a small envelope containing the few notes of money she had managed to hide. He counted them quickly. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for a bus ticket. His thoughts were interrupted when the door suddenly opened. "What are you doing?" Maria froze, feeling her blood run cold. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, his eyes squinted. "Nothing," he answered quickly, hiding the envelope behind his body. He approached slowly. "You look strange." "I'm just tired." Lucas tilted his head. "You know, Maria." He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. "I feel like you're distant. It worries me." Maria swallowed. "There's nothing wrong." His fingers squeezed hers. "You love me, don't you?" She nodded immediately. "Of course I do." He watched her face for a long time before releasing her hand. "Good." He stood up and kissed her forehead. "Sleep well." When he left, Maria allowed herself to breathe again. Fear had turned into urgency. She couldn't wait any longer. The next morning, Clara came into the kitchen while Maria was preparing coffee. "Lucas has been asking me about you." Maria kept her attention on the kettle. "What?" "He thinks you're hiding something." Clara looked at her sideways. "You're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you?" Maria forced a smile. "I don't know what you're talking about." Clara let out a dry laugh. "If you knew what was good for you, you'd keep quiet." Maria felt a shiver run down her spine. That night, when Lucas fell asleep, she quietly got out of bed. She picked up her handbag and walked lightly across the room. Her heart was pounding in her chest. With every creak of the floorboards, she held her breath. She reached the front door and turned the knob slowly, but before she could open it, a voice came from behind her. "Where do you think you're going?" Terror paralyzed her. Lucas was standing there, and his gaze bore no trace of the man who had once conquered her. Maria turned around slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. Lucas was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed and his gaze dark. The dim light in the room cast shadows over his face, making him even more intimidating. "I asked," he repeated, taking a step forward. "Where do you think you're going?" Maria clutched the strap of her bag tightly. "I just needed some air." Lucas let out a low laugh, but there was no humor in his tone. "In the middle of the night, with the bag ready?" He took another step forward, and Maria instinctively stepped back. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" "It's not that, Shut up." His voice sounded sharp. Maria felt her throat go dry. Her mind was screaming for a way out, but Lucas's every move cornered her even more. "Did you really think you could leave me?" He tilted his head, analyzing her as if she were a broken piece. "After everything I've done for you?" Maria felt short of breath. "Lucas, please, I don't want to fight." He clenched his fists. "Then stop giving me reasons." Silence stretched between the two of them. Maria knew she had to act quickly. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her gaze. "I just feel overwhelmed. I needed some time to think." Lucas watched her for a long moment. Then he relaxed his shoulders and let out a sigh. "You always complicate everything." She forced a shaky smile. "I know." He studied her some more, then took the bag from her hands and threw it on the sofa. "Go to sleep." Maria hesitated. "Now." She obeyed, each step seeming to weigh tons. She went into the bedroom and closed the door slowly, struggling to control her breathing. That morning, she woke up to the sound of the lock being turned from the inside. She wouldn't have another chance to escape. Maria opened her eyes with a start. The silence in the house seemed heavier than ever. She heard footsteps in the kitchen, followed by the sound of clattering cutlery. Lucas was already awake. She got up slowly, her body feeling stiff from the tension of the night before. When she entered the living room, she found him sitting at the table, drinking coffee as if nothing had happened. "Good morning," he said without raising his eyes. Maria hesitated. "Good morning." He looked up and indicated the chair opposite her. "Sit." Her stomach churned, but she obeyed. Lucas took a sip of his coffee before speaking. "I did a lot of thinking during the night." He placed the cup on the table and stared at her. "And I realized that I've been very patient with you." Maria remained silent. "You're lucky I love you," he continued. "Any other man would have lost patience a long time ago." She clasped her hands under the table. Lucas leaned forward. "You will never try to leave here again. Understand." Maria felt panic rising, but forced herself to remain calm. "Yes." He smiled, pleased. "Good girl." She spent the rest of the day in automatic mode, pretending to be normal, but inside her something snapped for good. At night she waited until Lucas was sound asleep. The rhythmic sound of his breathing was her only guarantee. With extreme care, she took the key from the lock he had left on the dresser. Her heart was beating so hard that she feared the sound would give her away. She turned the key slowly. The click echoed in the house. Lucas stirred in bed. Maria held her breath. He turned the other way. Without waiting any longer, she opened the door and stepped out. The cold, early morning air enveloped her. But she didn't stop. She ran barefoot across the yard, ignoring the rough ground beneath her feet. The road seemed endless, but she kept going. When she finally saw the distant lights of the city, a wave of relief hit her. She didn't look back. The first step to freedom had been taken. But now came the hardest part, starting again.